1 Samuel chapter 12, verses 13 through 15. Now here is the king you have chosen, the one you have asked for. See, the Lord has set a king over you. If you fear the Lord and serve and obey him, and do not rebel against his commands, and if both you and the king who reigns over you follow the Lord your God, good. But if you do not obey the Lord, and if you rebel against his command, his hand will be against you, as it was against your ancestors.
Thank you, Matt. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Great to see you this evening. This morning I wanted to get right into the lesson and really didn't say much about our trip, and I just wanted to say a couple of things. I did say it's good to be back, and that was heartfelt, and it is good to be back. We had a wonderful trip, good meetings in Glen Burnie, Maryland, and in Marietta, Pennsylvania. The meetings were well attended, and in fact, a lot better attended, particularly at Marietta, a small congregation called the Susquehanna Church of Christ, right off near the Susquehanna River, and beautiful, right in the heart of Amish country. Tim and Ellen were able to meet us back then. They had flown into Philadelphia and came in on Friday morning, and the meeting started that evening. It was a Friday night, a couple of lessons on Saturday and 3 on Sunday for there. But it's a congregation that's quite small, and they've had a lot of people move out of the area, and it's been a difficult work. Scott Long has been preaching there for a little while, and he had followed a man that had preached there for a long time who had passed away, Brother Clarence Johnson. And I know that they're really trying to do a lot of different things, but it was an encouraging, I think, meeting for them. And the brethren attended the meeting well, and they had a few visitors too, and so that was encouraging also. And so we just had, that was a good trip from the working part of it for the gospel meetings in Pennsylvania and in Maryland. And then we were able to move on and do some vacation things with Tim and Ellen. But really, to say the highlight, there are a lot of highlights when it comes to the vacation part and the tourist part. But when it comes to relationships, without question, the highlights when we're able to go to Connecticut and to spend a few days with David and Bailey Ross. And heard David preach this past Sunday morning. And I just want to say this to you, that they had been dealing with just the week before a little problem that had erupted in the congregation. And in fact, it was something that manifested itself publicly on a Wednesday evening before we had gotten there. And David kind of informed us, and he was able to step into the situation, told us exactly what happened, and I was so impressed with the maturity of which he handled the situation that evening, and then personally met with a couple of different brethren in the very next day, Thursday and Friday. And then because of that a gentleman who had made some mistakes publicly, David talked with him, and that gentleman, that brother in Christ, stood before the congregation on Sunday morning before it even started, and he acknowledged his wrong, made a public apology of that in a very gracious, humble way. He did it. It was heartfelt that you could tell. And then what David had to say after that, even before we got into the class session, because just about everybody was there, and for their class, and then of course worship that followed, but David said that the matter has been taken care of, and had been taken care of by the principal individuals in accordance with the teaching of Jesus, and he says this is no longer a problem and we're moving on. And he said it with maturity, with fervency, and yet he said it with humility. And I was just, and we talked to Vicki and Tim and Ellen, we talked about it, and I tell you, I've seen some of those things not go the right way, and it went the right way. And that's something that shows that when you have good hearts and when you do it the biblical way, and that's exactly what was being practiced in the teaching of Jesus, that you take care of these matters between your brethren before you offer your gift at the altar. And that's exactly what was done. It was so refreshing to see something done in such a scriptural way with good attitudes. And God was glorified. So I wanted to share that with you. And I haven't said anything. I don't even know if Dennis and Sharon even knew about the situation at all. And maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But I tell you what, I'm proud of your son. And we all can be because of the good work that he's doing. And then because of the situation, and again, in great humility, he preached a dynamite sermon that just dealt with the attitude of the congregation, and they're moving on. And it was good. We benefited from being there that day. But it's good to be back. It is great to be back and good to get back in the swing of things this week, and looking forward to setting up our classes and just getting back into the work that we're doing here. Vicki has given me a couple of different ideas for sermons here lately, and one I wanted to go ahead and do this evening and share with you a little bit. Appreciate the good reading that Matt did for us just a couple of moments ago there in 1 Samuel. And we're aware of the situation of really what's going on. A lot of you are in the Bible class on Wednesday evening that Tim is teaching in 1 Samuel. As a matter of fact, I think you're probably in about chapters 12, 13, right around there in that particular area. And we're going to be dealing with chapter 12 in verses 14 and 15 principally, but what we need to do is kind of understand the background very briefly. We know that as we see in 1 Samuel chapter 8, that the elders of Israel approached Samuel, and they just did not merely ask for, but they demanded a king. They demanded a king. In fact, what they said in chapter 8 and verse 5, now make us a king to judge us like all the nations. Now you have to understand that who is Samuel? Samuel is more than just a prophet. Samuel is a judge. 1 Samuel follows the book of Judges, and we have these 14 earlier judges that existed, with Samson being the last one that's talked about in the book of Judges, and then we come to this period of Samuel, and Samuel is a judge in that, occupying that position in Israel. He is also a prophet of God. He was chosen by God to do the work that he was doing. But it's very sad, the attitude that Israel had taken on at this point. And really the request, because a few verses later they would even say, not only make us a king to judge us like all the nations, that they wanted to be like the other nations. And we're going to see that in just a moment. But in 1 Samuel chapter 8 and verse 4, all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah, and said to him, look, you are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations. But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, give us a king to judge us. So Samuel prayed to the Lord. I think we can have a degree of empathy with Samuel, is that he's feeling very rejected, isn't he? He's the judge. He was born to this position. We know the story of Samuel and Eli when he was a young one and called to be a prophet in this way, trained, if you will. And they're not happy because he's old. His sons are not good young men. They're not. That's a sad situation and perhaps another lesson. But he's feeling rejected. And in verse 7, the Lord says to Samuel, heed the voice of the people and all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. You see, it was not a monarchy up to this time as far as a physical monarchy. Like the other nations, they didn't have a physical king. God was to be their sovereignty. God was to be their king. He was reigning over them. So when they say, make us a king, and even though they're dissatisfied with Samuel, in their spiritual immaturity, even the elders, the ones that should be older and wiser and mature, even the elders of Israel, in their spiritual immaturity, they're rejecting the sovereignty of God by requesting a king and saying, we want to have a king like the rest of the nations. I'll tell you, how many lessons and sermons could we preach just from that? That we want to be like the other nations. I see applications of that all the time, that sometimes even in churches, that is the church of the Lord, and maybe we look at the denominations, we look at other religious organizations and say, well, they do this and they do that, and we want to be like the rest of them. I tell you, we got to learn a lesson from this. Don't go down that road. We need to honor. We need to honor our King and those applications. That's not really where I'm going with this lesson, but we certainly could. But this was an immature view that they had. And when we see in verse 8, God tells Samuel, according to all the works which they have done since the day that I brought them up out of Egypt, even to this day, with which they have forsaken me and served other gods, so they are doing to you also. Now therefore heed their voice. However, you shall solemnly forewarn them and show them the behavior of the king who will reign over them. This is their request. This is their demand. Samuel, I know that you're feeling rejected. You have not been rejected, not in reality. God says, I have been rejected, but that's what they want. That's what they're going to get. And it goes right back to the old saying that's become popular in our own vernacular in the last several years. Be careful what you ask for. Because they were going to get what they asked for. He says, but you warned them. And then you see in these next verses through verse 18 of chapter 8, here's what this king's going to come. He's going to come and he's going to take your sons and your daughters. He's going to take your sons and he's going to do something called conscription. He's going to put them in this military. And he's going to take your daughters and he's going to take your servants, your male servants, your female servants. And he's going to put them and work them in the vineyards and in other places. He's going to take a tenth of your possessions. Of your herds, your cattle, your sheep. He's going to take all of these things. In fact, think about it. Were not the Israelites already involved in a pretty heavy tithing situation that they were to do of their own personal income, plus the tithing that takes care of the priesthood and all of this? And now the king's going to come in, and he's going to expect yet another 10%. Boy, I tell you what, we live in a country and society that was based upon a revolution because we didn't like taxation without representation. He says, okay, you want to look at this? Let's see what kind of representation that you're going to get here. But that's what they want. That's what they're going to get. And so Samuel warns them of all this. And this is where it gets interesting as well. And yet when he warns them, they still insist on having a king again, that they may be like the other nations, as we see in verses 19 and 20. Nevertheless, the people refuse to obey the voice of Samuel. Here he warns them, but they refuse. I tell you what, they have an opportunity to say, you know what, Samuel? We've come to our senses. You're right. This is foolish on our part. We should go ahead and respect God all the more and understand that he's our sovereignty. He is our king. Great song selection. He is our king. But no. They refuse. No, but we will have a king over us at the end of verse 19. Then in verse 20, that we may also be like all the nations, and that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. You know what? He'd sent judges like Samuel and other judges before, and God himself went out and fought their battles. What a lack of faith. Verse 21, and Samuel heard all the words of the people and repeated them in the hearing of the Lord. So the Lord said to Samuel, heed their voice and make them a king. And Samuel said to the men of Israel, every man go to his city. You get ready. You're going to get a king, and you're going to see some things that are going to change drastically there in Israel, in the land. Now we think of all this that's going on, and it takes us then to chapter 12. And one of the things that I want us to remember, that though Samuel is in many ways pleading with them and he's warning them, but he's telling them they're going to get what it is that they're demanding, what they really desire. However, even in their receiving a king, and a king that's going to reign over them, and a king that's going to have this army, and he's going to become the commander-in-chief, and this king that's going to tax them, and this king that's going to rule over them in so many different respects. However, their having an earthly king would not absolve them or relieve them from their duties towards God and his commandments. And they forget about that. They have forgotten about that. The king is not going to be the solution to all of their woes and their problems. And furthermore, they still have responsibilities towards God, and God is going to judge them accordingly. And this takes us to chapter 12, and the reason why I'm calling it the big little if for Israel, as we see in verses 14 and 15. Turn over to chapter 12. And we've set up the scenario, we've set up the background of exactly what's going on here. Their request, their demand. They're looking for this change and this shift. That they're going to become a kingdom, but a kingdom with an earthly king. And of course, it's going to be Saul, we understand. And I'm in the middle of working on another sermon, by the way, because I want to deal with Saul, David, and Solomon, just to give you a brief little preview, that it's interesting to me that all three of those, of Saul, David, and Solomon, all three of them had great beginnings, but then some real serious difficulties in their lives and their being kings. And I think I'm just going to call the sermon Great Beginnings. And that may be next Sunday. We'll see how it goes. But now they're coming to this time, and I want you to notice in 1 Samuel chapter 12, as Samuel is addressing the rulers, the elders, the people of Israel. At verse 14, if you fear the Lord and serve him and obey his voice and do not rebel against the commandment of the Lord, then both you and the king who reigns over you will continue following the Lord your God. However, if you do not obey the voice of the Lord, but rebel against the commandment of the Lord, then the hand of the Lord will be against you as it was against your fathers. This is what Vicky was contemplating here just not too many days ago when she was talking to me somewhere in our travels and so forth. She says, Brent, I really think that this would make a good sermon. Now, I could go back into the archives and actually pull out a couple of sermon outlines and show this particular passage and some of the points that I've made, because there are just some really wonderful built-in points here. And I appreciate where she in her mind was going with this. And I thought, yes, I can deal with that. And how I wanted to deal with that was the employment of the Hebrew word and its negation that's employed by Samuel, and that word if. If. How many times have we heard in our own time, in our own language, that it's been said that if is the biggest little word in the English language, right? And we see its employment here in both verses 14 and 15, and one as it is positively done, if you do the following, and then one where the negation is found, but if not. Let's look first of all at verse number 14, the if leading to blessings according to verse 14. And there in verse 14, there it says, if you fear the Lord and serve him and obey his voice and do not rebel against the commandment of the Lord, then both you and the king who reigns over you will continue following the Lord your God. Can anybody see any good major points out of that? Oh, they're in blue and they're underlined. I would rather imagine, Dennis, you probably preached on this text, this passage a time or two in the past. The conditional if in the Hebrew is im. It's found all over the Old Testament. Im, two little letters. It's one of those few, it's one of, most Hebrew words are based on three consonants, but you have these particles are called particles in the Hebrew, and a lot of times that they're just two letters. They're just two letters, and that's what we have here in this aleph and this mem. And this im, and it's used very widely as a demonstrative conditional particle. Now that sounds fancy, doesn't it? A demonstrative conditional particle. Forget the particle part, except for it's just this important little part of speech. But the two other words are really important. Particle is two, but these are really important from this idea of demonstrative and conditional. Now, if something is demonstrable, well, we think of demonstrate or demonstrative, but demonstrable is something that very much stands out. It's something that even has a built-in emphasis to it. It's demonstrative. It's like having this demonstration because it's giving this message. But it is a demonstrative conditional particle because it's conditional because that's the very idea of if. You see, this is going to happen if this happens. Conditional, right? And that's what and this is typically very widely used again in the Old Testament. And Samuel uses this in verse 14. If you fear the Lord and serve him and obey his voice and do not rebel against the command of the Lord, then, and then is your adverb of time, if this, then both of you and the king who reigns over you will continue following the Lord your God. Now those points that stand out, I just want to make this very, very simple. Because this is not difficult to understand, and what he means by this, we can do fabulous word studies. And I have them written, I think they're on the outline for you, are they not? In the Hebrew words of Yareh, Vad, Shema, and Lomara. And when we look at those, and these are not, obscure, remote words. These are actually words or phrases that are found constantly throughout the Old Testament. And when you look at this, what he's saying now, if you fear the Lord, Yareh. So one of the vocabulary words in the Hebrew studies I do with the fellows in the training program. Matter of fact, by the way, Sam Bray, who's going to be starting in August, contacted me today, and he's getting excited about a target date of actually starting and so forth, and that's going to be happening very, very soon. But in this idea of yoreh, that's translated in most translations as fear, it's the ideas what you might commonly think or expect to respect or to revere. If you fear the Lord. Now, we would see that its equivalent in Greek may very well be one of two words, because it all depends. It could be phobos, because there is a fear factor of God, even a phobia, because of who God is and His majesty and His strength and His ability to judge. We ought to fear that, right? But it also could very much be the Greek word eulabia, because eulabia is to reverence something. Because we fear, there is this reverence. And this probably is much more associated with eulabia in the Septuagint. But the idea is that if you fear the Lord, you respect, you reverence God. God demands reverence and respect. When they are asking or demanding a king, God's not being respected. He's not being revered. Brethren, all I can tell you is that our responsibility today is no less. It's not changed. Are we to respect and revere God? And we could just go to a plethora of passages in the Old Testament and the New Testament, and I'm not going to be running cross-references. I want us to understand that we are to appreciate, yes, but we are to revere, we are to respect God. God is holy, He is to be revered. And any time that we look at God's plan, His position and His plan, and we decide that we're going to do something different, we're going to change it, we're going to substitute it, we're going to do anything like that, I want to tell you right now, God is no longer revered. It's our responsibility to revere and respect God by doing His plan, not ours. And this is the message Israel needed to hear, because they had already said, here's what we want, and they had not rejected Samuel, they rejected God. That's a total lack of reverence, of Yareh. Avodad, avodim, servants, is a noun, but in this verb form that we have here of, looks like abad, it's avad, how's that is pronounced, but it's to serve, and it's kind of interesting because it's a word that talks about serving and even working. Sometimes it's associated with work or a task, to perform a task. But there's a good number of times that this word was used in reference to the priesthood in performing their duties as priests in worship, performing worship. Performing that kind of service. And that much is the application here. He says, if you fear the Lord and serve Him. Serve the Lord. Serve God. They had spent way too much time serving themselves and their own needs. It was time for them to learn that you, one, fear God, you reverence Him and you respect Him, and two, you serve Him. It's Him that you serve. It is Him that you worship. It is Him that you honor. Is that any different today? Again, when there are churches that are trying to establish themselves and to posture themselves that they might serve their own needs and serve their own pleasures, their own desires, or what is that they want out of religion, I want to tell you, you're not fearing God and you're not serving the Lord. Serving the Lord is looking at the Lord's will, looking at the Lord's word, and saying, we serve Him, therefore we will do it His way. That's reverence. Do you see how these go hand in hand? That we are to fear the Lord and that we are to serve Him. And not only to serve Him, and then it becomes very natural, what are we to do? To obey His voice. Now, this is idiomatic because He uses the word Shema. Let me tell you that almost, and Shema is found hundreds of times within the Old Testament Bible, the Hebrew Bible. And Shema means to hear. In fact, Deuteronomy 6:4, which is called the Shema, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. Remember that passage in Deuteronomy 6:4? Hear, O Israel. It's called the Shema because it begins with that. Shema Israel. Hear, Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. And so it's idiomatic because here it's translated by most translators is not as to hear His voice, it's obey His voice, But you know what? That's idiomatic because we say, do you hear me? We hear his voice, but what it means is his figure of speech is to obey his voice. I just think about this, and again, dealing with my father when I was a youngster, and my father would say when I did not do what he said, and he might ask me and say, did you not hear what I said? Which was my way of knowing I did not do what he said. I did not obey the voice of my dad, of my father. And so these things work together. There's just a natural flow here that if you fear the Lord, reverence him, serve him. That's a task even that involves the way that we worship and serve him and put him first and obey his voice. Obey his voice, that we truly listen to what he says and obey to what he says. And then he goes to this, and then he uses a negation here, and do not rebel against the commandment of the Lord. Then both of you and the king who reigns over you will continue following the Lord your God. Now, in this, do not rebel, rebel not, as we have the negation there, lo marah. Lo is your Hebrew word, it's the negation. It can mean no, it can be not. But the idea of lo marah idiomatically is that which becomes contentious. And in looking at some of the lexicons, even this afternoon as I was double checking a few things this afternoon, is this very idea that when one rebels, that rebellion is contentious. Can you imagine? To be contentious with God. Because that's what they had been, and they needed to stop. I think it's an interesting and fascinating word study that has so many applications for us today that we're learning from this. Yareh abad, shema lo marah. Fear, serve, obey, do not rebel. And if the conditions are met, blessings ensue. Stay there in chapter 12 and look at verse 20. Then Samuel said to the people, do not fear. You have done all this wickedness, yet do not turn aside from following the Lord, but serve the Lord with your heart, with all your heart. And do not turn aside, for then you would go after empty things which cannot profit or deliver, for they are nothing. For the Lord will not forsake his people for his great name's sake, because it has pleased the Lord to make you his people. By the way, in verse 20 and verse 22, God does this. Yes, he wants his people to do the right thing, and they'll be blessed. But I'll tell you what, God's name is going to be blessed, and God's name and God is going to be honored. And he does this for his own name's sake, because of who he is. You know what's fascinating to me about that is that we look at a world today, and how do so many people in the world feel about God today? And we know that people do not have at large good attitudes and right thoughts about God, right? But now if we who claim to be God's people are not fearing him and serving him and obeying him, and we find ourselves in rebellion, they look at us as being hypocrites. Our religion isn't working for us. And what happens to the name of God? It is further blasphemed. God says, this is for my own name's sake. You do the right thing and I'll be honored and I'll be glorified. When you don't do the right thing, God says, look what happens to my name. You know, that's so true today as well. That's why it's important for us to recognize that if we make bad decisions, poor decisions, sinful decisions, not only do we look bad to a world that is looking for us to be hypocrites, almost wanting us to be hypocrites, many people, but furthermore, look what it does to the name of God. Then he says in verse 24, only fear the Lord and serve him in truth with all your heart, for consider what great things he has done for you. I'll tell you what, the if leading to blessing, he says, if, you fear the Lord, serve him, obey his voice, and not rebel against the commandment of the Lord. And as much as that was true for Israel all those many years ago, it is true for us today as Christians, as the church today. But he has to share the next message as well, and that's in verse 15. However, now we know what that does. You look at a passage and you see these blessings that are promised, and yes, there are conditions, because you have that conditional, that demonstrative, conditional particle if. But now he has to follow with that, however, if, and it's him again, you, because it's put in the sense of the second person plural, y'all. If you do not obey the voice of the Lord, but rebel against the commandment of the Lord, then the hand of the Lord will be against you as it was against your fathers. Now, the if not in Hebrew is imlo. That's a phrase that is found exactly in that form numerous times in the Old Testament. If not, just take your concordance. If you got it on a computer like PC Study Bible or some of these great Bible programs that just gives it to you right now, and all you got to do is just type in there, if not, and hit go on that thing and just see how many times if not is found in the Old Testament. And in almost every one of those cases, if you go ahead and bring an interlinear up then next, and that interlinear, if it'll give you the Hebrew, it's going to give you that form, imlo. It's the negation of the demonstrative conditional particle. So I want some of you to be able, you'll be dreaming tonight, and it's going to be coming into your dreams about the demonstrative conditional particle. Because this is demonstrative, and it is always conditional. So he says, however, showing the other side of this. Now he goes right back to the idiom, if you do not obey the voice of the Lord. That is, if you don't hear, Shema. If you're not listening, and this is what Samuel the prophet, God is having Samuel say this to the people of Israel. He's still a judge, and he's a prophet of God. But if you're going to stop listening, or you won't listen if you do not obey the voice of the Lord. And then, of course, what comes next is the morah. But rebel against the commandment of the Lord, then the hand of the Lord will be against you as it was against your fathers. And so you see that, the if not leading to curses. Because what a curse that would be. Okay, this is where it needs to get very real for us. How do you think we would feel about our life and our situation if we came to the realization that the hand of the Lord, listen to me, that the hand of the Lord was against you? That the hand of the Lord was against me. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily that we're going to die physically right away. It doesn't even mean that we may not continue to have a job and make money and live life. But what it means is that we're not receiving his blessings. And if we're not receiving the blessings of the Lord, then that is just another way of saying that his hand is against us. We need to be blessed by God. Now he sends, Jesus taught in Matthew 5, that he sends the rain and the sunshine on the just and the unjust. So really, it doesn't even have much to do about that. Are there not a lot of people living wicked year after year and yet receive and enjoy many of the physical blessings of life? Yes. But where we really need to be blessed is spiritually. And we don't want to be cursed spiritually. And that's what he's saying in verse 15. Then when you drop on down to verse 25, after in verses 20 through 24, he deals with the positive. If you do it right, then here are the blessings. But then in one verse, in verse 25, he says, but if you still do wickedly, you shall be swept away, both you and your king. Now that can happen a lot of ways, and it certainly happened with Israel. Let's first of all think about who's their first king? Who's going to become their first king in united Israel? Saul. Now I'm going to be talking about this coming up probably in a week. If not, it'll be the next week, Lord willing. He had a great beginning, didn't he? Saul did. But as we say in our vernacular, it went south real fast. And a few different things that he did, including going into the temple, offering a sacrifice, which he had no right or authority to do, including not destroying the Amalekites like he was commanded to do in chapter 15. Who was his son that was such a close friend to David? What was his name? Jonathan. And Jonathan's a good guy in many respects, but I want to tell you what. Did he even experience some of the curse of his own father? He did. They were both killed in battle the same day. And Israel becomes weakened and weakened. This is what they asked for. And God says, okay, you're going to get this, but it does not relieve you of your responsibilities towards me. And I fear, brethren, that there are times that even as Christians of the church, we may have in our minds what we think we need to ask for in the church and what we're really after. And maybe God will go ahead and let us do some certain things, but I want us to understand we are never, ever relieved from our real, true duty towards God. What He expects of us every day as the church collectively and as Christians individually. You see, if not, curses will come. I have as a cross-reference in your outline in the bulletin of Deuteronomy 20:18, because look at those couple of chapters. And this is where Moses, as he's giving his final farewell addresses before he dies to Israel, and he tribe by tribe, and he says to the tribe, if you do these things, here's the following blessings that will come upon you. And blessings, blessings, blessings. But if not, and then does he give a variety of curses that will come upon Israel, tribe by tribe, person by person. Take the time to read some of those. These things that were written for our learning. Brethren, it has not changed. If we do what God says, He is honored, He is glorified, His name is exalted and will be blessed. If not, then He's not honored. His name is not exalted, He is not glorified, and will be cursed. It's that simple. It's that serious. And it brings me to this conclusion, and we're done. Jesus stressed the same kind of if in so many different ways, but I was thinking about the time when He's trying to teach His disciples in the upper room about servitude and humility by washing the disciples' feet in John 13, washing the disciples' feet. It was an act of humility and teaching them to serve. And the statement that He makes to them in teaching lessons about this is a statement that has so many different applications in so many different ways. But Jesus says, if you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. And I'll tell you what, that's the big little lift for us today. It really is. It's not any different than what God had Samuel tell the people of Israel. Jesus is teaching the same thing. And a great study that you could all do, and you could pull out your Strong's Concordance or go in your Bible program because they're quick, and just put in the word if and hit enter and see what happens. That demonstrative, conditional particle is all over the Bible. And it's a big little if. And I hope that we will take it to heart. Let's serve God. Let's honor God. Let's revere Him. Let's serve Him, obey Him. Let's not rebel, and we'll be blessed. If we can help any this evening in making that decision for Christ, becoming a servant of God, obeying His will, we just want to extend that invitation of Jesus Himself and assist you in that and any need that you may have. If you're ready to obey the gospel and be baptized, I'll tell you what, we can take care of that tonight. If you need to somehow dedicate or rededicate your life to God and been any problems, let's pray. Let's get together. Let's study. Let's do what we need to do. We can assist you. Won't you come at this time as we stand and sing the song that has been selected?